you turned it over from a 2 billion loss to a 2 billion profit.
We want DHL to be the best in the world at what we do. But we also want to be an example of the world at its best. A great business has got to have great people. And great people is not just a great CEO. It's great people at every level of the organization. But it's all about training, development, interaction, asking people for their ideas, not in the stupid old-fashioned way, a suggestion box, right? But actually being out there on the floor, talking to people. People always say, a great culture when you see it, right? But how do you get there? It's a different thing. Simple doesn't mean easy, right? You can have a very complex strategy, but you've got to be able to break it down. Otherwise, what's the point in having it if people don't understand it? I did what the company wanted. I didn't have a career path. I didn't sit down, 20 years ago and say, right, I want to be global CEO.
Welcome aboard EMIT Talks. On this episode, we dive deep into the success story of Ken Allen, former global CEO of DHL Worldwide and author of Radical Simplicity. Credited as the mastermind behind DHL's miraculous business turnaround from over $2 billion in loss to over $2 billion in profit, and cementing it as one of the best working environments in the world. Join us as we take a look at his unique rise to the pinnacle of his industry and break down his radically simple methods to help succeed in any business venture. What and how he focused on and prioritized, and how he proved that there truly ain't no mountain high enough. Right here on EMIT Talks. Welcome aboard EMIT Talks, where we dive deeper into success. We've already introduced the man himself, Ken Allen. Welcome aboard EMIT Talks.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Pleasure to have
Lovely
you.
Lovely Gouna.
Beautiful Gouna. And we start by literally taking a page out of your book, Radical Simplicity, where you always recommend starting with purpose. Yeah. And our purpose is staying true to our slogan, diving deeper into success. But we always believe that success never really happens without a spot of failure. So from straight off the bat, Ken Allen's favorite failures in life?
Well, actually, my whole success story sort of really originates from a failure. Because what happened was, Deutsche Post bought DHL back in 2002. They tried to make it into a bigger global powerhouse. They made a lot of mistakes along the way. And then when I became global CEO in 2009, we were actually losing $2 billion a year, which is mind-boggling actually when you think about it. But underneath, I just knew that the essence of the business was in great shape. So turning it around was a relatively simple thing, but simple doesn't mean easy, as you'll find out in the book. And then 10 years later, we were making $2 billion. But I think an important point to make there is that the real heroes of business are not the turnaround experts. These are the people that you always see in the newspapers and everything else. But the real heroes are the CEOs who grind out revenue and EBIT improvement year in, year out, and don't have to make these big adjustments. Because I tell you, the thing that I found in my career is that when management makes mistakes, it's the frontline worker that generally bears the brunt of what's going on. If the CEO makes a mistake, he's given a multi-million payoff and he goes. But the frontline workers, with you close factories, you close hubs, and they're the people that really suffer from it. So I think it's incumbent on management to make sure that these things don't happen, right? To build a great business, to make sure that every year, yes, you need to take risks to a certain extent, but they have to be calculated, and you have to be an expert in what you're doing to make sure that we continue to grow revenue and grow it profitably.
And speaking of being calculated, you come from an accounting background. Yeah. And throughout those incredible 10 years of turnaround, where you turned it over from a 2 billion loss to a 2 billion profit, there must have been some very difficult calculated decisions. Right. Yeah. Can you recount some of what the most difficult ones were?
Yeah. Well, when the things started to go really wrong, 2008-9, I was actually in the United States, And at that point, the domestic industry, air express industry in the United States was going backwards. The global crisis was looming on the horizon. And we had to make some pretty horrendous decisions, right? We had to close a hub in a place called Wilmington, 10,000 redundancies. We had to close down one of the airlines. It was election year as well, 2008. So Obama came to Wilmington and wanted to know what we were doing. John McCain came as well. But again, back to my point, what I found there was that the frontline workers in that hub, even though they knew we were going to close it, we never lost one day due to strike action. We had no reduction in quality. And so after we'd done all that, we got together as a management team and we made a promise to ourselves that this would never happen again, that, we were going to build the business for growth, that we were going to take risk, but calculated risk. And we were going to get back onto a growth path, which is just exactly what we did. So I think those decisions, when you have to lay people off, close facilities down, they're the most difficult decisions that you have to make as a manager. Sometimes it's inevitable, and it's really, cleaning up the management mistakes of the past, and then just having a clear view forward of what you're really good at. And that's why I call my book, to an extent, Radical Simplicity. I think part of the problem was we were trying to be everything in logistics rather than be the thing that we were really world class at, which was international express. We were market leader already. It's a great business. It's capital intensive. And so if you run it properly and you make the right investments, you can continue to grow. And actually, that's what happened, right? So when I left Express in 2018, we made $2 billion that year. We become the 6th best place in the world to work. My successor, Mr. Pearson, who I'd known for a long time, he got the profit up to $4 billion and got us to be the number 1 place to work in the world. And I think of everything that I did, bringing in a successor who did a better job than me is probably the one I'm most proud of, right? Because everybody says that finding your successor is the most important part of the role of a CEO. But I'm not sure that everybody really believes that, right? They want all the glory for themselves. And, I look at, say from a football point of view, Sir Alex Ferguson was one of the greatest managers of the era. But unfortunately, after he left, Manchester United have gone gradually downhill, right? They've not
says a happy Leeds fan.
yeah. Well, I'm very happy, right? Yeah, we got promotion to the Championship now. Yeah, interesting.
So I want to touch up a little bit on the feeling side of things, because I'm sure a lot of people would ask a CEO on the thought process or the business savviness of laying off thousands of people and closing down facilities. But I think it's rare that people actually ask the CEOs, well, how did that feel? And more importantly, how do you process that emotion and utilize it into developing a work culture, like you said, has become one of the best in the world?
Yeah. Personally, I found it dreadful. I was moved to tears on numerous occasions, right? Especially as I told you, we found out that people were actually giving us great quality and turning up for work every day, even though they knew what was going to happen in the end. And that's why, you really got to understand that a great business has got to have great people. And great people is not just a great CEO, it's great people at every level of the organization. I'm really a big fan of Lady Gaga, right? And she has this great speech at Madison Square Garden where she's, I want you all to realize that, don't listen to what other people say about you. Don't worry if they say you're too fat, you're too thin, you can't dance, you can't sing. You just remember that you're a goddamn superstar and you were born this way. And my philosophy is, if you want to be the best in the world at anything, then whoever works for you has got to be the best in the world at their function, right? They've got to be a superstar in that function. So if we have a courier, international courier, he's got to be the best international courier in the whole world, because we want to be number 1. We got to have the best superstars of the customer service industry, because we want to be number 1. And I think when you start to think about your people like that, then the whole method of how you manage changes, right? Command and control anyway is a thing of the past, right? But it's all about training, development, interaction, asking people for their ideas, not in the stupid old-fashioned way, a suggestion box, right? But actually being out there on the floor, talking to people, asking them for their ideas, because nobody knows the customer better than your frontline people. And this is where we should, this is what we should build on. And so when I was in DHL, we introduced this training program. Well, it was more than a training program, it was a culture change called CIS, Certified International Specialist. And, we developed this idea of the passport. And this passport became incredibly successful because what we said to everybody is, we don't care about your sex, male, female. We don't care about your education level. We don't care about your sexual orientation, your religion, anything else. As long as you give great service to our customers and our own people, and you want to be the best in the world like we are, then, you're a member of the family. And this really bound everybody together. And it was amazing. We had people from all kinds of, country conflicts and everything else come together and really build on it. Because I think motivated people is this cornerstone of any strategy. Motivated people, they deliver great service quality. Why do they deliver great service quality? Because they know, if you've trained them well, that the system works. And that if they just follow the system on certain things, then the customer gets what he's paying for. But also, if something does go wrong, which unfortunately it does every so often, then they have empathy for the customer. And they're not afraid to escalate issues. They'll do whatever it takes to get things right for the customer. Then, if you've got that great service quality, it keeps all your customers loyal, at the right price, as long as you're not trying to gouge anybody. But, generally, customers who are happy will stay with you. And if they're going to leave you or they're thinking about leaving you, they'll explain to you why, and then you can do something about it. And loyal customers is the best route to profitability in any industry. If you increase retention rates by 5 or 10%, you can increase the bottom line by 50 to 70%. And so, they're your best route for profitability. So, at the end of the day, you don't need finance people. People will pay you a good amount of money and they'll pay you on time because your service is so good. But it all starts with that motivated people element. And as you grow, I think that becomes even more important because then you introduce the concept of purpose. People who are happy at work, they want to do more for society in general, right? They want to do volunteers days. We launched this thing called DHL's Got Heart, where we asked all our employees around the world, 100,000 people, are you doing anything in your community, to drive activities, charitable activities? And honestly, it's mind-blowing. And again, it brings tears to your eyes when you look at, what a courier or a customer service agent or a finance guy is doing in many countries around the world to help their society. And then, if they win the prize at regional level, we brought them to a global scenario where we could win even more. And then, because we're a logistics company, we launched the concept of DRT, Disaster Relief Team. Because, we have presence on just about every airport in the world. And when there's a disaster, the money will come, generally. But what people need on day 1, 2, 3 is logistical support. So even, when there was the tsunami and meltdown of the nuclear reactor, Fukushima in Japan, the Japanese didn't need money, but they needed, our aircraft to bring in water and other supplies as quick as possible. So... And that develops a massive sense of purpose amongst our people. Because the other thing is, if you look at any industry, the strategies are generally the same. 86% of what DHL says is similar to what FedEx says, is similar to what UPS says. So the real driver behind it is execution, right? So execution, 90% of execution is people. And 90% of what people really want when they work for a company, as well as great training and good salary, though, is a sense of purpose, right? Deutsche Post, DHL used to say, connecting people, improving lives. And so making people very proud of what they're doing really sort of generates a sense of wanting to the right thing for the company, for the customer, and for the world. And in fact, again, probably one of my most proudest moments was when I won a communicator award. And it was a small article that I'd written about the football that we'd had, and we had a lot of women's football teams in there. But what I always said is, we want DHL to be the best in the world at what we do. But we also want to be an example of the world at its best. Meaning, all our people will get on together. We don't care which country you come from, if you're French and English, we still get on. But, some of the more conflict areas, like unfortunately today, we've got the Pakistan-India thing, right? But, we have teams from Pakistan and India, and they play together, and, they have a sense of purpose together. And I think if politicians from around the world could see how big companies like DHL, and it's not just DHL, it's many more, but how we build a global philosophy that we're all part of the same family, we're all part of the same team, I think it makes the world a much better place. And we want to be an example of the world at its best.
Because what the world needs now is love.
Sweet love.
I wanna touch on that company culture, because taking it from like you said to the first or the fourth best sort of working culture in the world is something that I feel you really toiled over. The simplicity of finding the purpose, as you said, and with simple master strokes as painting your whole fleet yellow of airplanes. What sort of tips and tricks did you sort of find up your sleeve to sort of improve the working culture to that point?
Yeah. I think the biggest one was the passport to success. That every single person in the organization could have it, whether you're a courier, CS agent, or the regional manager. And actually, this thing was such a success for 100,000 people in Express. It was rolled out to the whole of Deutsche Post, 550,000 people, right? And when we launched the program, there was two or three things I think made it really successful. Number one, it was delivered by the management, right? Obviously, we had somebody to help us to put the programs together, but when we started rolling it out, I rolled it out. I and my management team, the global management team, we rolled it out to the regional team. The regional teams rolled it out to their country teams, and then their country teams rolled it down. Otherwise, we couldn't have done it that fast. 100,000 people in 220 countries and territories, right? And that made a massive cultural change, because it made sure that people were out in front of their own people, out of their comfort zone, doing sort of training programs and making sure that it was all driven right down to the front level. Secondly, a lot of training programs that you'll see, they're written in English in America or in the UK, say, and then they're sent to Japan and China and places like that for translation from English into Chinese or Japanese. We didn't do that. We had teams in these countries, and we made sure that the translations were
culturally appropriate.
Culturally appropriate, right? Took into consideration, how you'd say things in Japan or Japan, and that went down really well. And actually, we started doing that in 2009-10, right? And we were still losing a lot of money. And the program in the beginning, cost somewhere between 50 and 100 million, right? And I remember the CFO said to me, she said, Ken, what if we spend all this money and, people leave us? I said, Melanie, what if we don't and they stay? So, just realizing at that point, even though we weren't making, we started to improve profitability, but even in that moment when we were still losing money, we really understood the total importance of doing that. And it became really, really ingrained in the organization to the extent that, you could see a courier on the street in London and ask him for his passport and he would have it. And I hope that's still true today. And of all the things I took when I left DHL, this is probably, the only thing. And every time we did a course, right, we opened a new facility or did something like that, we put a visa in, which was a sticker, just so that people, sort of felt proud about what they'd done. And then when you went to places, people would ask you, can you sign the passport as well? So it really built a culture of as one. We call it as one, like gladiate, whatever comes out of those gates. We've got more chance if we were together as one. And then that's what drove the whole success of making a strategy interesting to everybody, from the regional director to the frontline customer service agent or courier, right? To the extent, we had the 4 pillars, as we call them: motivated people, great service quality, loyal customers, profitable network, and then we did a song for each one. Now, I can't sing for anything, right? But just to try and get those messages through to frontline people, I think is so important. And, then when we looked at our scores of what our people thought about our strategy, it went from like 56% to 86%. So it really went through. And it's different in every company, right? Every company's journey is different. But I think you've got to make the strategy your own, so that when people hear certain things, they say, "Oh, well, that's a DHL strategy, or that's a CNW strategy," and then getting it right down to the front line, I think, is important. And that's why, these companies where strategy changes every 2 or 3 years, they can never be successful, because it takes 4 to 5 years to get the strategy from the boardroom to the front line, unless you do things like the passport, like singing the strategy and things like that. Yeah.
Speaking of making strategies your own, one of your own strategies that you highlighted in your book, Radical Simplicity, was your 3 S's: simplicity, speed, and self-confidence. And now that you're talking about the CIS programs, I kind of feel it's all linking in together, because to achieve an employee that has peak self-confidence, you've got to achieve peak culture first.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you start off with all these things sort of connected, or did it all sort of come along the way where you realized that, wait a minute, this is all feeding into each other?
Yeah. I think at the beginning we had to be very, very focused, right? So it was bit by bit. I think the simplicity thing came first, the passport and everything else like that. But then as you grew to the point of speed, we had to get it rolled out fast. And also the point is, even in where we've got great training programs and a great culture, some of those frontline jobs like courier, like customer service agent, they have a reasonable high level turnover in a lot of countries, right? So we had to make sure that every new employee, when he comes on board, he's very quickly indoctrinated, with the passport and the strategy. So we made sure that people were certified immediately came into the company, right? They weren't allowed to go out until they'd done some of the training. And then every so often do the courses again and make sure that you're up to date. And it is self-generated to an extent, because, right, so say if somebody gets promoted from country manager into a regional job or something like that, then the new country manager comes in. We have to reshoot all the videos again. Welcome to my country, welcome to my function. And just go through the whole process again. So it's pretty self-regenerating, which I think was probably, we didn't think about it like that at the time, but the way it's worked out, it's come out like that.
And touching up on the self-confidence aspect as well, I'm sure a lot of that comes born out of an internal dialogue.
Yeah.
So we're all curious. Over all these years of your tenure at DHL, what was Ken's internal dialogue like? During different periods, what was your internal dialogue when you first took on the job? Yeah. 2 billion in losses, losing 100 million a month, Yeah. And then what was your internal dialogue when you took it you turned it around to becoming one of the best working environments in the world?
Yeah. Well, I've been with DHL a long time, right? Before I joined the board, right? So I joined DHL in 1985, right? So been in DHL total 37 years. I always say, right, I had 37 years of experience, not 1 year repeated 37 times, right? So I always knew that, and in fact, every region I worked in, I improved profitability, right? So I knew that inherently that the business was a good one. And even when I was in finance, right, at the beginning, I always had that attitude that, I should understand the business and I should go out with the salespeople. The purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. And so everybody in the company should have some kind of customer interaction. Now, for me, the easiest one was, collecting debt, which is not always glamorous, but at least we could go and see customers. And I tell you, it was very important for me, because what I learned is when people don't pay their bills, it's not normally because they don't have money or they can't be bothered. It's because they've got a problem with the service. This shipment was late and we didn't get a credit, or this shipment never arrived, or this shipment was damaged. So going out with salespeople as a finance guy, you learn a lot about what was going on in the business. And I think that's so important. And, one of the tragedies I find, and I've seen it as I've gone up in my career, some people, when they get promoted, they spend less and less time in front of customer or in front of frontline people, which is crazy, because at the end of the day, there's nothing more important. There's nothing more important than being in front of customers, and two, there's nothing more important than being in front of your people. So my philosophy was always, you need to be out. You can't become great sitting behind a desk. And then when I eventually took over, but I'd use this philosophy, throughout my career. I said, 70% of your time should be in front of customer or in front of your own people, motivating, going along with them. And it's amazing what you find. And frontline people, they will give you great ideas as to, what you can do better. Because, they've been to a customer today. They can come back and say, listen, Ken, I went to XYZ customer and I noticed there was a FedEx van there. I've never seen it there before. What's going on? And then, we get the salespeople involved. And you can really build a great business when people feel, that they're listened to and everything's going to work. And I think that element of listening is probably critical to being a good manager or building great management. If I'll tell you a funny story. My father told me when I first became CEO, he says, Ken, being a CEO is like being a gardener in a cemetery. And my dad's a coal miner, right? So, oh, Dad, that's a bit deep for you. Well, how do you mean being a CEO is like being a gardener in a cemetery? He says, there's a lot of people underneath you, but none of them are listening. But the point is, if you don't listen to people, they won't listen to you, And I think, being out there and doing all these things. I remember, I go back to the singing piece as well, sit in front of 100, 200 people, and singing, a lot of, I would say like 60% of people join in and enjoy it, 30% of people sort of, and then there's 10% who think you're a raving lunatic. But you just gotta forget about that. You just gotta shrug it all off. It's like if I tell a joke and nobody laughs, I'll just say, "Oh, I thought it was funny." So, yeah, you just gotta do the best that you can.
But I think those points sort of link in perfectly, because there is a very nice chapter in your book about how leadership should be visible.
Yeah, for sure.
And that leads into celebrating achievements loudly as well once they come. And I want to link the celebrating achievements loudly with the amazing story of that Ashford and Simpson song, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. And how a company like DHL just, I don't know if they lucked out with that song or if it was like an absolute point of genius of choosing that song, because I feel it sort of changed the fate of the company somehow on many different levels too.
You're right. And there's two elements of it. So back in 1984-5, I think, the UK used that Ain't No Mountain High Enough as a song with the whoosh and everything else. And then when we started to turn the company around and we could afford to reinvest, we relaunched it as the yellow version and everything, right? And it just fits everything, If you need me, call me, no matter where you are, no matter how far. And that's a great song for frontline people, right? If your customer needs you, no matter where you are,
I think if you tried to write a song for a logistics company, you would not probably nail it as much as that song did.
Yeah. And it became very, very popular. And I see what the interesting thing about advertising, just as a slight aside, a lot of people think you advertise for your customers, which you obviously do. But actually, when we started re-advertising, because we started to make money again, the reaction from our people was just amazing, right? We got more calls and emails and comments about the fact that we were advertising again. And so I think when people see you advertising like that, they think, company's successful again. We've got a lot of things to do. So, but my favorite song actually was the Profitable Network. So, and I tell you again, this is a great thing about, when everybody gets involved. This was told to me by an IT guy in Singapore, right? They were not the most outgoing kind of people. He says, Ken, I've got a great song for Profitable Network. And so he sang, I want to be a billionaire, so freaking bad. UPS and FedEx will be sad want to be on the cover of Forbes magazine. TNT is never to be seen. So it was a play on, at that time, I think by 2011, we were looking to be $1 billion in profit, right, from tooling. And, everybody was getting really excited about it. So everybody sort of joined in and came up with great ideas like that. So it is infectious. Great culture is infectious. And it's hard to really describe what a culture is. People always say, a great culture when you see it, right? But how do you get there? It's a different thing. But I think in a company as big as ours, it is a lot about training and development. It's a lot about trying to bring on the best tools for everybody. Especially when e-commerce came along very strongly, we had to sort of communicate with people by mobile. Up to that time, most of our business was B2B. You know that the Philips factory or the Samsung factory is there and it's open at these times. But all the interaction with customer when you get into an e-commerce environment, and a lot of that was driven by courier, right? We need to know what we need to mobile phone of the customer. We need to know whether we can leave it with neighbor. We need to know whether we can take it to a third-party location. And they help us drive a lot of the development in that area. So when everybody feels part of it, it has an immensely strong feeling. Yeah.
Speaking of training and development, I'd like to highlight alignment. How maybe sometimes aligning with different entities can help training and development and help a company. I mean, I'm a huge Formula One fan.
Right.
And I love the fact that I think it's been almost over 25 years now, the deal between DHL and F1. And F1 being one of the most intense and organized to the millisecond sort of global events that happens. How much did DHL benefit both internally and externally from aligning with an organization like Formula One?
Massively. And I think everything that's great about Formula One, you could relate that to DHL. It's probably one of the most international sports. Okay, football and everything else, but this is a different type of moving around the world. A lot of logistics involved. DHL actually moves some of the cars from place to place. That attention to detail. And there's a very interesting story here that DHL introduced what they call fastest lap.
Yep.
So every year, we find the driver who had the fastest lap, and you see in my book, I give an award to Hamilton and a few others.
And fastest pit stop too.
Too. But the fastest lap, then Formula One picked that up and gave a point to it, right?
Yep.
So, we sort of helped a little bit to the spot. And to your point, when you give the fastest lap, the drivers, it's usually on the last day of the season, the drivers are a bit tense and everything else like that. So you don't always get the best dialogue. Every time you give the fastest pit stop, the crews love it. They're being recognized in front of everybody. They get a little trophy, and what they do is incredible. As you probably know, they saw it's coming to sub 2 seconds now, right, to do the whole thing. And so this thing about involvement as well. So when we did all of our sponsorship, right, but like Formula One, for example, we gave everybody in the company, 100,000 people, a Formula One T-shirt. When we signed the deal with Manchester United, we gave everybody a Man United T-shirt with the logo on. When we did Formula E, we gave everybody a Formula E T-shirt, right? Doesn't sound a lot, right? But 100,000 times, let's say, a minimum $10 each. It's no small.
That's a lot of packages delivered.
Yeah. But I think that's important that you've got to share it with everybody, right? So how do you get people excited about the Man United sponsorship, especially if they're a Tottenham Hotspur or a Man City fan? You give them a T-shirt, and if they don't want it, I'm sure they've got friends or relatives but it's just that whole thing about involving everybody. And, the DHL T-shirt became synonymous with so many things that we've done. And then we tried to give one to everybody in the world. And then I also remember a thing that got me in a bit of trouble with Deutsche Post, right? So when we first started, when we made our first billion, I said, look, I want to give everybody in the company, no matter where they are, $100. And again, it doesn't sound much, right? But it's times 100,000, it's 10 million. And then taxation issues, it went up to about 15 million. But then the other divisions within Deutsche Post said, well, we've had a good year as well. Our people have worked hard. So the sort of 50 million went up to about 55 million, right? And I got a call from the CFO again. She goes, Ken, what are you doing? These kind of things. I just said, but if we're successful and we're going to pay, our managers a $100,000 bonus, surely we should give something to the courier. And it's not always easy to do that, but I think every year you've got to find different ways of making sure that everybody feels involved and feels part of the success story. And to be honest, the longer it goes on, the harder it gets, because you got to be so careful about, creating precedent. And, if you paid it 1 year or 2 years, and you got to pay it every year and things like that. But I just always think, and that's why the sort of T-shirt is a great idea, because, you don't have to give one every year. Every time we did a new sponsorship, we brought a new one in. But it's all about, making people feel a big part of it. And then people love it. So, becoming #1 best place in the world to work, that sort of started beforehand in customer service. So there's a great lady called Patricia Tan. She invented what we call an insanely customer-centric culture, right? Which is great. But she came to me and said, Ken, I'm not going to go to American Express or Hong Kong Shanghai Bank customer service department anymore. She says, I think we've got the best in the world customer service of anybody, not just in the express industry. She says, every country that has a customer service competition award, I'm going to apply for it. So that from small beginnings, right, they started applying around the world. Customer service teams were massively motivated, right? And it's a tough job, customer service, right? You're taking complaints, you're taking your high pressure environment for bookings and everything. And it sort of started in Asia, where she was based, Singapore, Hong Kong, and they rolled out everywhere else. And I think when I left, we'd won 220 awards in different countries around the world, just based on her initiative. And then the HR people said, we should be doing the same. We've got great training, we've got great philosophies. And so we linked in with a company called Great Places to Work, who were associated with Fortune magazine. Then they started to win awards all over the world. And, the excitement in the HR teams was just palpable, right? So it's just, you just got to find different ways of making people feel really involved. And if they can enter some kind of competition and win it, or even enter it and just gain the experience, it's amazing how great that is. And then another thing we had before I took over, we had a thing called Euro Soccer, which was all the countries in Europe would get together and play football. And it was mainly for frontline people. And then because of losses and everything else, it got canned. And then when I came back after about 2 or 3 years, I said, right, we're going to do it again, but we're going to do it globally, but by region, but globally. And people just loved it, right? So everybody would get together on a Saturday and Sunday in different locations, and they play football for the region. And then we said, right, well, how do we get other people involved, right? The fans and everything else. So then we had like a cheerleading competition. And again, it sort of brings you to tears almost to see the dedication. So, you go there, and, the first people would come on and do the cheerleading. It'd be like 5 or 6 people and a bit of a sing and a dance. And, it was good, entertaining. And then, gosh, a year later, it was like the Olympics. They'd be doing triple somersaults and throwing each other around, and
big bands
and everything else. People just incrementally improve things all the time if you give them the opportunity and make them feel an integral part of it all. Yeah.
Well, you seem to have done a lot of that, all this work motivating people throughout the years. But it kind of also seems that a lot of those decisions almost gave your CFOs heart attacks.
Yeah. Well, I'm a CFO as well, and yeah.
So that's for me. That's a very important area to sort of prod into.
Yeah.
The whole, where do we draw the line, and how do we handle that battle of no, this is a fight that we need to fight.
Yeah.
We need this expenditure because as the CEO, you see how it's going to benefit the company.
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and I think I'm lucky in inverted commas because I came from a finance background, right? And I think there should always be tension between the CFO and the CEO. They should be a great partnership. I'm not, they shouldn't be fighting and everything, right? But the CFO really is the conscience of the organization, saying, hey, can we really afford this? Should we be doing this at this point in time? And then, then as CEO, you've got to get the rest of the team back in you rather than back in the CFO. But it's true. It's true. You've got to be very, very careful. And I think that, the great things about this, let's say the T-shirt and some of the awards that we did, you can turn them on and off, right? So if you're having a really good year, you can say, right, okay, well, let's put 10% of the money to be doing something like this. And then if we don't have any money, then we have to turn it off. So, it's playing the game a little bit and using that money when you can. But the CFOs have got very important roles to play. And the other thing, coming back to my point about closing humps and everything, when we spent money, we never spent it on things that would be permanent, right? A lot of it was things that we could reasonably turn on and off pretty easily, right? So, we never wanted to get into a position that we'd have to lay people off to make the target or anything, And I think one of the big things in business is, how do we keep as much of the expenditure variable as possible? Now, sometimes it's impossible. Like in a business like ours, we're very asset intensive, right? So we have to make some big calls. But if they go wrong, for example, just before I left, we signed up with Boeing for 15 777 aircraft, right? Which was a bit eye-watering for everybody. But I rationalized that in my mind in that, if from somewhere there was a massive downturn, then we could always, sell those aircraft off or park them to an extent, or just take on the financing costs. And goodness gracious, that's what happened, right? COVID came along just almost, and it just shows you how things can change rapidly. So COVID happened, and there was big meetings at DHL, right? Okay, what are we going to do with the aircraft and the air network? Are we going to park it in the desert? Are we going to do this and the other, right? So for the first 3 or 4 months, it was like that. And then after that, the demand was so great, right? We could have used another 30 freighters. In fact, we were looking around the world to where could we pick up other freighters, because the freighter aircraft that were allowed to fly, they were packed everywhere. But I knew that if that decision hadn't made out in normal times, we could have done something pretty simple and not had to lay people off. I hate the idea of laying people off.
Moving on from laying people off to maybe laying down every once in a while and getting a bit of R&R.
Yeah.
I'd like to focus on the life of a CEO and the balance that's required from being good to yourself and being good to your family and because, your job was in charge of hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, but how difficult was it, and what advice would you give to anyone who's struggling to maybe make it meet between family, life, personal, and running a company at this size?
Yeah, and it's not easy. I think you've got a very supportive family, especially your wife, right, who understands, what the pressures are and what the issues are. So, I'm very lucky with my wife, right? She, when we had to move different countries and all the rest of it, she was very supportive. I think a couple of things. First of all, I always try to make sure I'm home on a weekend. That's one thing. It doesn't sound much, but you got to do all your planning like that. And secondly, I always used to take my summer vacation, and I'm talking 3 weeks. And I used to do a lot of diving. So diving's great because while you're down there, you can't get any phone calls, right? And and I think generally your staff and your secretary and everybody else, they know when you're off, and generally that they don't bother you too much, right? I always keep my mobile on so that if there is a global issue, then I get to know about it. But I think if you've got a well-motivated team, the issues that would require your input at any point in time are very few and far between. We had regional managers for each of the parts of the world, right? If they had a problem in Hong Kong, they could probably fix it better than I could anyway. So I think it's important to keep that space. But then, that sort of reinforces the point about having a great team around you. You can't do it all yourself. And you've got to have people who know when to take the action and know when to call. And I think the real urgent issue is, if there's a aircraft incident or something that could get into the global news, then you need to know about it straight away. So you have to have your mobile at your side. But I think most great teams know when to make those calls and when not to. And that's honestly that's a great thing about having a great team. And if you have a great team, you don't need a big team as well, right? So my team, I remember in the US, it went from 18 to 8, and I still thought 8 was too many. But having that belief in the people around you is so important, and keeping it small, I think, is a great thing as well.
What about personal habits that you swear by or would recommend to anyone wanting to succeed or achieve anywhere near the level of success that you've reached?
I think, actually, somebody asked me this the other day. I think the reason why I became successful is, first of all, I had a lot of knowledge, right? But secondly, I did what the company wanted. I didn't have a career path. I didn't sit down, 20 years ago and say, right, I want to be global CEO. I did my job as well as I could do. And I think if you do a great job in most organizations, somebody will notice, right? And somebody will mentor you, right? And I remember in the early days, when I first started as a finance guy, the regional finance guy left. And I had only been there about 6-7 months. And then the regional manager at the time came past and he said, "Ken, have you applied for the regional finance job?" I said, "No, I've only been here 6 months." He said, "Oh, well, you won't get it then, will you?" And that was a hint, right? And I applied for it and I got it. And that was, the start of the move. But, then, I just become engaged to my wife. And they had an issue in Yemen. They needed somebody to go down there urgently as country manager for 3 months, right? And they asked me. And I said, "Oh, yeah, it's not the best time." But, I spoke to who was my wife now, and I said, "Look, I've got to go for 3 months." She says, "Yeah, fine." We just correspond and everything. So I went to Yemen, and then I became regional manager of the Middle East. And then there was the crisis, in the late 90s, sorry. And then they put all the functions together and moved them to Singapore. So they asked me to go to Singapore back into a finance role. I said, "Yeah, sure." And I was in Singapore, and they had a big problem in Canada, which needed a turnaround. And they said, "Right, we want you to be country manager to Canada," which was like a fifth the size of the role that I had. But I went. And so, every time I was asked, I just went around and did it. Even, the United States, where we were losing huge amounts of money, then I just thought, well, if not me, then who? Yeah, and if I don't go, I really felt that there was something to be done. So to answer your question, I think it's, think about yourself as well, but at the same time, if an opportunity comes up and you think you'd be good at it, obviously apply for it. But if the company says, we really need you to go here and do that job, unless there's a massively fantastic reason, then I think you should do it. And then people appreciate that, and you get experience as well in different environments. So that's what I did. I never had people always ask me, what was your career path, what was your thinking? When I took finance at night school, I thought, one day I'll be a CFO. I didn't think about becoming a CEO, right? And it was only when, again, a lot of it derived from this part of the world. When I was in Middle East, I became regional finance manager. And then my manager, he was looking to move on. He said, "Right, I'm going to make you deputy regional manager, side of finance and regional role." And I think if you do a good job, somebody in senior position will spot you and they'll act as a mentor. Might not be an official mentor, right? But they'll look after you and say, "Come on." Yeah,
that is very sound advice. And speaking of acting as a mentor, it seems that you've poured most of your mentorship into your book, Radical Simplicity. Yeah. How did it feel writing it?
It's I think it's something that everybody should do at some point in time. It's not easy. And I'll tell you, the worst thing I had was the audio book. My mum's a bit blind, right? And I said, "Oh, don't worry, Mum, I'm going to do the audio. I'm going to bring out an audio version." She said, "Well, I want you to say it, right? I don't need anybody else saying it." So I sat down in the studio for like 2 days or more, reading the book out loud. And honestly, you think to yourself, I shouldn't have said that. I should have put this here, you know. So you're constantly re-criticizing yourself. But it sort of really gets it then ingrained in your mind. And I said to my mom, "Did you enjoy the book, Mum?" She goes, "I fell asleep after 10 minutes." But that's what parents are for, right? To bring you back to
You think reality. It was your voice or was it the actual content?
Yeah, a bit of both. Well, my daughter, Nicole, who spends a lot of time here, I said to her, I said, "Have you read the book then?" Oh, she said, "Dad, I got to page 12, but I know it all anyway. I lived it through it with you." But yeah, it's a good thing to do. And in fact, a lot of people that, I'm associated with at the moment, older people, are sponsoring UAE and the regional manager of the Middle East now. I say to them, you should write a book. You've got, a lot of great things to say. It's good things for your kids and, for people around you to go through it. You don't make a lot of money out of it, right? Unless you're super successful.
Comes with the 8th book, I hear.
Yeah. I'm not going to do another one, that's for sure. But no, it's a great thing to do. And when I was writing it, I realized that all the things I was talking about, I'd actually lived them, in my different roles and positions within the company, right? So it was like a reaffirmation of the philosophy I'd undertaken for so long. And there's quite a few people who had said to me, "Come on, write it down." A couple of stars aligned, right? It was DHL's 50th anniversary. It was founded in 1969, so it was 50th anniversary in 2019, and I was going to leave and go to another division at that point as well. So we were writing, we wrote a book about the 50 years of DHL within Deutsche Post as well. So that kind of piece aligned. But then it was good to get my philosophy down. And, it's been a good prop to use. I do a number of speeches. I'm doing a speech next week to Post Nord in Sweden. So, base a lot of it on the book. And they like the idea of the self-reflection, simplicity, execution, leadership, and focus, right? So it gives people a outline of how to think about things at the same time.
And I'm a huge fan of that philosophy, and I'm curious as to your thought process of linking clarity, which is, I think, what everyone is seeking in any sort of aspect in their life, be it business or personal, and starting that out with simplicity. Yeah.
Well, I got a lot of inspiration on simplicity from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, he was, from a manufacturing point of view and a presentation, he was a master of simplicity. But he makes it very clear, simple doesn't mean easy. What you're trying to do is you're trying to boil down all the essence of strategy and product and everything else into a one-pager that a frontline person or the global head of operations can understand and take it on. So doing that, and who wants to pay McKinsey $1 million for a simple strategy, right? As people are going up through their career, right, do they want to sound simple? It seems counterintuitive to what most people do. But I say to everyone, look, simple doesn't mean easy, right? You can have a very complex strategy, but you've got to be able to break it down. Otherwise, what's the point in having it? If people don't understand it, there's no point in doing it. And it all links together. It's like leadership. Leadership. Are people happy when you walk in the room or when you walk out of the room? And the people who can keep people interested and motivated, they're great executioners as well. So, as you said earlier, it all links together when you understand it all, and you can have that clarity of thought that says, right, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to lay it out. And again, it's like the passport. I keep coming back to it, but it was such a simple idea, and yet it's such a unifying process. And as I say, we started with with Express. And when I left, every single division was doing their version of the passport, right? Because the elements of it, and that's the other thing I found, right? Every book you read or every management presentation you go to, everything's the same. It's all the same. There's not one original idea really in this book, It's just that I synthesized it, because, I had practical experience. I synthesized it into the book. But, I think most people who are in management, they've read hundreds of management books like I did. But, I have 3 on my bedside table now. One is Mean Business by a guy called Allen. It's all about restructuring and focus. Well, it's not really about restructuring. It's making sure that everybody's focused. How the Mighty Fall, which is by Jim Collins, right? And that's about just making sure you don't fall into the trap. And, one of the biggest traps is being successful, right? And thinking, right, well, we can do everything. And you can't do everything, right? You've got to be really focused about what products you're in, where you want to be really good. And then there's one called Execution by Larry Bossidy, right? And, execution is all about great management teams, very focused, incrementally building businesses up. So a lot of those ideas in there. Even the 4 pillars, motivated people, great service quality, loyal customers, profitable network. That all comes from Service Profit Network, which is in Harvard Business Review. In fact, FedEx had one called People Service Profit, right? Because with all these things, it's about how do you make them your own, so that when people know, it's like Pat Tan's idea, we used to say, right, great customer service or sick to your stomach if something goes wrong. She goes, what about insanely customer-centric culture? And it just resonated with me, right? I said, well, yeah, because if everybody was insanely customer-centric, a lot of problems in businesses would disappear. Because everybody wouldn't be scared to escalate. Sometimes you find problems there in business and you think, well, why didn't somebody just escalate it or tell somebody about it? But everybody's so worried about the organization structure and not going above somebody's head. But if your number one priority was insanely customer-centric, you don't care about structures and everything else like that. You want to solve that problem for that customer immediately, right? And if you work for a company where you know that, right, if I exceed my, normal authority, nobody's going to be angry with me because I'm doing it for customer, then it's all going to work out. And I think we find that a lot. The frontline people will do great things just to solve a problem for a customer.
A customer-centric approach, radically simple, simply delivered. Ken Allen, thank you so much for all this incredible insight that you've given us throughout this past hour. We hope you've enjoyed the talk. And once again, thank you for coming aboard on EMIT Talks.
And great to be in Gouna. I love Gouna, right? So, I've been coming here for more than 25 years now. I've seen the place develop. My kids love it, In fact, now my grandkids are coming now, so it's just a wonderful place to be. And again, I think for all of us, we've got to be grateful for what we have. And this is an amazing location, an amazing place to be. And so is Egypt. I'm Egyptian now,
We know.
So I love the place. Okay.
Pleasure. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you
Pleasure,
very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.